What is this? Judgment Day.
Greetings, children of the screen, your friendly neighborhood nerd scum here once again, and today I'm going to be taking a look at Batman The Long Halloween Part 2. Now, if you missed my video on Part 1, then there's a link for it popping up right now, and I highly recommend you check it out, as really, while this is a Part 2, it is very much a Part 2. This isn't really a sequel or even a continuation. This really is one movie that is split in half for the purposes of marketing and making the highest amount of profit. And it is true that it was a kind of longer movie, but that's the main reason for it. It really is just one long movie, and as such, there are going to be a lot of elements that I speak about in this where I will refer back to things that I said in the first one, because a lot of the elements are very similar, being handled by the same creative team, the same cast, all that stuff. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and dive right in. Batman The Long Halloween Part 2 is rated R, coming in at an hour and 27 minutes, directed by Chris Palmer, with a screenplay by Tim Sheridan, based on the writing of Jeff Loeb. Right on, guys, so this video will have spoilers in it, but I'm going to try to save all that stuff for the end of the video, and I will definitely let you know before I get into that stuff. As I said in my opening, this really is one long movie that has been split into two, and because of that, the second half of it really contains a lot of the same strengths and a lot of the same weaknesses as the first half. So what I'm going to do first is go through the things that the movie did well, and then I will voice my complaints at the end, and that's really where we'll get into the heavier spoilers, because like with the first video, a lot of the things that I didn't care for, in order for me to really articulate those things, I'm going to have to go into like specific plot elements that will have spoilers in them. So, in terms of faithfulness to the source material, like with the first half, this definitely takes some liberties. However, I do find that in the second half there are slightly less liberties taken with the story, and most of the liberties that are taken with the story, with some exceptions, are really more due to the things that were changed in the first half of the movie. It wouldn't really make sense to do things the way they were in the book if you've already changed that in the first half of your movie. So, I really don't mind that. I think that the way that they handled a lot of the changes in this is very well executed, and it works for the movie that they are making. The animation style in this movie, as I said in the first video, is definitely nothing like the actual source material itself, but I think that's actually a good decision in this particular instance, because the artwork by Tim Sale in the original book is extremely weird, and it would be very difficult to keep the characters on model with those designs throughout the entirety of this film. Now, having said that, I really love the art from the book, but the thing that really sells that on top of the character designs is the heavy noir atmosphere and feel that the artwork has, and this film does a good job in both halves. While being completely different from the books in terms of style, still really capturing that kind of noir feel. And at the same time, this film does have the animation style of the kind of other newer DC animated movies that we've seen, because it is taking place in the same universe. So we've got the Superman movie that they put out not too long ago, as well as the Justice Society in World War II. I've got a video on that too, link popping up right now. Yay. But I really like this animation style. Yes, there are times where it comes off a little bit cheap, but overall it's consistent, and it is a vast improvement over the things that we got from kind of the New 52 style movies like Justice League War and Batman and Son and all of that kind of stuff. And as with the first half, really where this animation really seems to sing is actually during the action sequences, which again is a vast improvement over the things that we've been getting in the previous DC animated universe, where a lot of times the action was kind of the weakest element, and whenever they would go into those action sequences, you could tell that they were choosing shots not based on whether they were the best shot for the film and for the sequence itself, but based on what was easiest and cheapest to do with the animation that they were doing. However, in this, whenever we get to the action sequences, they are very well handled in terms of the animation. They all flow very nicely, they all have a really good kinetic feel to them, and they're highly entertaining. And I have to say that the directing for the voice actors in this film is excellently handled. Every person seems to embody these characters in a very visceral way that I definitely appreciate, and the voice cast, while they are pretty much the same cast from the first half of the film, I feel like it's still worth stating that they do an excellent job embodying all these characters, and Jensen Ackles in particular does a great job at portraying this version of Batman. Right on, guys, so now we're about to get into some spoilers, and I know that the part of this video where I'm praising things that it did well is relatively short, but as I said, a lot of those things are the things that they also did well in the first half of this film, and I spoke more at length about them in the first video that I did, so definitely check that out. Once again, we're about to go into spoilers, as well as talk about the things that I think they screwed the fuck up in this movie. So, in terms of my first complaint about this movie, the pacing of the film. The first half of this film, part 1, really handles its pacing very, very well, whereas this one is not handled well. In the beginning of the movie, you have some very fast-paced action sequences, and you have a few of them that are lumped together really close, and then there's a long period of the film where it's much more kind of the noir mystery aspect of it, and while both those things in of themselves are handled really well, the way that they're integrated together is a little bit jarring and makes it feel like the middle of the movie really drags, and never quite gets boring, because again, everything else around it is done exceedingly well. But it definitely hurts the flow of the movie, and you'll find yourself at a certain point wondering how much longer is in the movie, and realizing that it's actually only about halfway over when it feels like it should be just about to hit the climax. My second big complaint about this film, and this kind of holds true to some aspects of the first half of it, but there are way too many people who wear masks who are way too cavalier about just taking their mask off in public. We have multiple times where Catwoman removes her mask in public in this film, and mind you, it's normally in a setting where there's no one within the immediate vicinity that could identify her, but it's still a big risk to take. And we also have a sequence in the film where Batman is under the effects of scarecrow toxin and he removes his mask as well, and again, that's kind of almost understandable from the point of view that he's being affected by the fear toxin, but at the same time, it's just one of those things that feels off. It feels wrong. It feels like even a Batman this early in his career and even being affected by the fear toxin would know better than to just remove his mask in the middle of Crime Alley whenever he just saw civilians a moment ago. This isn't a place where it's like, oh, he's safe and no one's going to come in and like see his face. Like most of the time when Catwoman does it, it's a little bit more isolated, but this, because of the placement of it, it feels extremely contrary to what we know about Batman. I guess they're doing it because they want to do it in scenes where the actors are having bigger emoting moments, so that you can really see in the animation the emotions on their face, but because it feels so out of place within the superhero genre, it really doesn't have the effect that they're going for. So these next couple of issues kind of go hand in hand, and they also kind of relate to what I was talking about earlier with the masks being pulled off. In the first half of this film, part 1, it's supposed to be Batman as he's kind of new. He's only in like his second year of being Batman, but in that film they put such an emphasis on how new he is and how inexperienced he is and how bad a detective he is, mixed with some of the poor decisions in terms of the third act storytelling. It really makes Batman come off as kind of incompetent, and this movie doesn't really do anything to help that. Again, he takes his mask off in public way too much. He's way too cavalier about his secret identity. He still doesn't really appear to be that great a detective, and the last little bit that speaks to this definitely ties into my final issue, which is both part 1 and part 2 of this have a lot of trouble sticking the landing. And in this one in particular, I actually really like the climax of the film in of itself. However, the prologue to the film is extremely problematic for me and kind of hurts this version of Batman quite a lot. Now, if you remember in the book, at the very end, we find out, despite the fact that Harvey is basically taking the blame for all the holiday killings, that it was actually his wife who did a good bit of those killings so that they could be together and crime would stop getting in the way of their relationship and they could build a family. And this is told through her basically doing kind of a narration, or speaking to Harvey even though he's not there and can't hear her. But in this film, they insert Batman into that scene, and she basically lays out all of her motivations and just flat out confesses to Batman that she was the one who did the majority of the killing, except for the killing on the boat of the Roman's son, which was Harvey, which I do at least appreciate that, because in that sequence in part 1 of the movie, they show you a pretty good close-up of the Holiday Killer, and it's obviously Harvey Dent. But still, we now have Batman being told up front that she was responsible for the majority of these killings, and Batman just lets her go. And for me, when you combine that with all the other issues that this version of Batman has had in terms of being incompetent, or not being a great detective, or not being very good at being Batman in general, you also then have to add to it that this version of Batman does not have the moral fortitude or, the moral standing of the Batman that we typically know. Like, Batman that I know, whether it be from The Long Halloween or the majority of comics, if someone confesses to murdering someone to his face, and he's standing there as they're destroying the evidence that they're the person who committed those murders, whether Batman has sympathy for them or not, whether he understands why they did it or not, he's not going to just let them go and go live their life. That's not who Batman is. He has one of the, most uncompromising moral standards of any comic book character, and this really hurts not only the climax of the movie, but it also hurts the character of Batman himself. It makes him feel lesser than a lot of the other versions of Batman that we've gotten, and it also makes it feel as if a lot of the things we've seen happen in this movie don't really matter. It just does not work on so many levels. The reason it works in the book is because we as the audience are told, but Batman isn't told. Even though he suspects it, he has no evidence, he has no proof. But in this, he's literally standing there watching her destroy the evidence of it. He sees her take her murder weapon, the gun, and put it in the fire. It's ridiculous, and I hate it. And the other thing that is just mind-boggling about it is, there's just no real motivation for it. It comes out of nowhere. There's no reason for it. Now, if this had been a story that was told 100% from Batman's point of view, I would almost understand this change, because then in order for the audience to get that bit of information, you would need Batman to be there. But through both halves of this movie, we've seen multiple scenes and sequences where Batman does not appear. So the film is not being told from Batman's point of view, so there's really no reason to have him there. And at the end of the day, because that is one of the last things we're left with in the film, it really gives us a negative feeling about who this version of Batman is. This version of Batman is not a good detective. This version of Batman is frankly incompetent in a lot of ways. This version of Batman does not protect his identity well, and worst of all, this version of Batman is more than happy to let a murderer, a multiple murderer, walk the streets free for the rest of her life and keep that shit to himself. And at the end of the day, that is not the Batman that I believe in. So, having said that, and having spent as much, if not maybe more time talking about the things that I didn't care for in this movie as opposed to things that I did I enjoy the movie? Yeah, actually I did. Overall, I found it to be extremely enjoyable. Again, yes, it does drag a little bit in the middle, but because I really respond to those kind of noir-style stories and the pacing of them, it didn't really negatively affect the film too much for me. And yes, the ending of the movie I did feel was a little bit of a letdown, and it definitely hurts my opinion on this version of Batman. I still think that overall, the majority of the film is extremely well handled. The animation is solid, the directing is solid, the acting is solid, and overall, it's just pretty enjoyable.
Do you know what my people call this past year? The Long Halloween.
So, if you're watching this far in the video past the spoilers and you have not seen the film, then I definitely recommend it. And honestly, despite the fact that this version of Batman is definitely not one of my favorites because of that ending, I'm still interested to see what they do with this version of the character moving forward in this new animated universe. So anyway, guys, those are my thoughts on Batman The Long Halloween Part 2. Have you seen it yet? Let me know what you thought down in the comments below. And if you like this video, please leave a like and share it with some friends. Also, if you're not subscribed to the channel, make sure to subscribe so you can check out all the dope content I'll have coming out in the future. Thank you very much, children of the screen. I hope you all have a good one. Nerd Scum, out.